We can do whatever, and hopefully it'll just be a fun conversation between the two of us.
Oh, I think it can be. I was thinking I need a cup of coffee. And,
do you want a cup of coffee?
Well, it would have that added dimension of getting up at a motel, and then this is full-bodied, flavored.
Coffee's important. All right. Welcome to In the Act, a radio program on process and the creative life. Creativity does not just start and stop with artists. We all make aesthetic or guiding decisions. Our aim is to talk through the process and investigate how we choose to express ourselves and live creatively. We're connecting with people about their lives, and that is the subject of our show. Broadcasting in the studio from Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, I'm Ernest Huntzinger, and this is In the Act. Today's guest on In the Act was a clergyman. He's a husband, father, friend. He was an author. I still think you still write stories and poems. You were a professional singer. You're an advocate for creative expression and experiences. And you said here, it says, and caring relationships with the world community of people and places. And I think that's such a wonderful expression. Today's guest is Dr. Ernest Harold Huntzinger, Jr. as the full. Thank you so much for being here.
I am delighted to be here, Erica Jane.
He is also my father, so this will be a fun.
It is a fun experience, just simply in preparing to come over and thinking, what on earth will Erica direct to me by way of questions? Because some of those questions will be over my head. And
Not true.
How will I field those?
Not true.
We've had many, many dimensions of working together. And I can remember exploring just simply when we were on a trip together, just you and I, visiting my hometown of Fountain Springs, Pennsylvania, and then looking for sulfur diamonds amid the coal regions of the area.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun, trying to discover where those sulfur diamonds would be in a pile of rubble and
I had forgotten about that. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that your life experience is pretty impressive in terms of the breadth and width in which you drove yourself, I think. And talking about your early experiences in your home life were so important to facilitating like who you were and where you came from and where you are now. And I was wondering if you could, because life isn't linear, you're like the perfect example of like a non-linear life. And I just wanted you to share a little bit about where you came from and what life was like for you. And if we could start there, if that's an okay place to start.
That's a fine place to start. When I go back to that, what I thought was the world surrounded by mountains and surrounded by coal mining and the ravages of the earth. Yeah. That I saw desecrated again and again and again. Deep tunnel mining and then strip mining. And the Schuylkill River, which originates in the area that I grew up and runs into Philadelphia. That river ran black, and there was not a vestige of life on its banks or in its waters.
From the coal.
The coal barons would take that river water, run it through the coal to wash the coal and put it right back untreated into the river. And so I thought that was a scourge then, and I think it's a scourge now. And whenever I see relaxation of of areas that are are destined to be polluted. It brings a knot to my stomach and an abhorrence to my mind.
Devastating.
The trees were dead along the banks of the Schuylkill River. There was nothing alive. So that was part of my experience in growing up.
Yeah.
If I had been with freshwater, I might have learned to use a canoe.
Right.
It was a lovely, lovely river to canoe on. Not then. It is now.
Yeah.
But not then. So other things that were singularly important to me, the drawing point for getting together was school, and then the church. I grew up in a congregational church, a small, very small church, and right next door to us was Roman Catholic Church. And I was fully acquainted with Father Moran as I was with Reverend Kaler. And I can remember we would go over, and when they had a block party, we would participate with them. And when we had a dinner or something, the Catholics would come and join us. So there was a wonderful mass interchange of ideas and expressions. And I attended, because we did not have a vacation Bible school, I attended the Roman Catholic Vacation Bible School.
Yeah.
And got into a fight with one guy who decided that I didn't belong there. I belonged someplace else. I didn't know where I belonged at the time. And I remember he socked me right in the jaw. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Well, then the nun came over, and she took care of me, and that made this guy by the name of Harry Whalen very upset.
Oh my gosh.
And, well, it was an intercessory part on the part of that nun, whose name was Sister Veronica.
Oh,
I
beautiful.
remember the name. Delightful human being. So there was a cross-fertilization just in terms of Catholics and Protestants, for one thing.
Yeah.
And then the marvelous aspect of getting to know men within the church and women within the church. Although we had the boys' class, and there was a girls' class, and there was my mother who taught in Sunday school. My dad did not teach Sunday school, but he was a member of the choir. And what a magnificent voice he had. He was bass baritone. I sang duets with him.
So cool.
It was a delight in many ways to just go to that church. It was a marvelous place for me to learn different things and listen to different preachers. And and then I remember one time that I think I was a sophomore in high school, and there was a teacher's institute, and my mother decided who was a teacher, an elementary school teacher, taught third, fourth, and fifth grades in one room.
Wow.
And but she decided that it would be good for me to hear this judge. He might have been a Superior Court justice in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. His name was Kissinger. And I'll never forget, he ended his speech on that particular day by saying, "Now what I've disclosed to you are the features of mankind that have exposed themselves to us in many and diverse ways. We have learned that man can fly in the air like a bird, swim in the sea like a fish. When in heaven's name will he learn to walk on the earth like a man?" That left an indelible impression. As you can see, I remember that from all these years past. But
what did that mean to you?
It meant to me that we can experience a great deal by way of technology. And at the same time, if you lose the relationship of being a human being to fellow human beings, and to be able to work together.
Yeah.
And to be able to experience one another in new and different ways, just having the exposure to that. And so I've leaned into many times experiencing the new. How would they do it? How would they live? And I'd go into those places, little hamlets around, because it wasn't just my community. My community consisted of Germans. Many times they were the ones who owned the land, and the Irish who were brought in to toil the mines, getting things out. And at first, I thought, oh, these Irish, they have it easy because they have a house provided for them, and they have their own store. Well, the house was provided by the coal company. The store was provided by the coal company. And Tennessee Ernie Ford had a massive hit by saying, I owe my soul to the company's store. Believe me, that was true.
Wow.
And if a man were injured or hurt in the mines in some way or lost his life, that family was given 15 days to vacate the property so that somebody else could come in.
Wow.
So the book that I wrote called The Patch is a reflection of some of those instances and the real difficulty that those early Irishmen had. And they were such fun. Oh my gosh. There was one bar in town that was owned by a fellow with a German name, and the rest were Irish. I'll tell you, when I delivered papers, I'd go into those bars, and they'd greet me like one of their own, like their son. Ernie, you little bugger, come over here. You want a pretzel? Yeah. Here, sure, have a pretzel. And my mother would be appalled at the fact that I'd go into the bar and talk to these men. They were wonderful men.
Yeah.
I enjoyed them. And they had such colorful names. I don't know where. There was one fellow was named Skylight O'Neill. And that's because he always walked very erect with his head in the air. So it was Skylight O'Neill.
Wow.
That was his name.
I love it. So they're like creative made up names, little nicknames. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think through the years, you've had so many stories. You're a big storyteller. And the names of the people always sound like characters out of a book, but they're not. They're actually real people named Fern. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but just these wonderful names. And that, it was the environment sounds like a really toxic, abusive sort of environment in terms of its like the coal mining region and traumatic experiences. You'd listen for, the whistles of the coal mine being in the area, knowing that there was a disaster. And
I experienced that too, Erica Jane. I remember shortly after getting my driver's license, so I was just 16 years old.
Yeah.
There was a fire in an adjacent valley, and the town was Gerardville. And I decided at lunchtime that we'd go over and see what that was like, because we could hear the whistle from the high school that there was a disaster taking place, and it was a shrill, long whistle, steam whistle. So I drove over with a few of my buddies, and the approach to the mine, billowing smoke was coming out of that mine shaft, and people were scurrying up the roadway, and I looked at my buddies and I said, "We don't belong here.
Yeah,
we got to get out of here." And there were men getting into asbestos suits with oxygen tanks, and to go down there to see if they could rescue these people. I think there was something like 30-some people who died in that disaster. But I'll never forget that. That was part of living in the coal regions. My dad had his back broken mining in one of the tunnels of one of the mines.
So he was a coal miner too.
He was a coal miner. Yeah.
But it healed.
Yes. And he was in a full body cast because of his back. And yet he had to get the hay in. And I can remember his complaining at supper time saying, I have an itch right in the middle of my back, and there's no way I can get to scratch it. So he said, Ruth, do you have something? My mother's name was Ruth. and she said, well, here's a yardstick. And he'd take that yardstick and go down between the cast on his back and scratch that.
Because he farmed too?
Well, he farmed also. Yes, he was a farmer. And so he had to get the hay in. And he had people help him do that. But, that was part of the chore. And so, yes, he had a broken back, but he had to do other things too.
Right. And you had a paper route, and you had a family, and
yes,
sisters. And
matter of fact, I at one point remember that I saw some brook trout in one of the bridges that I was crossing, and I looked down and I saw that pool of trout, and I thought, oh, wouldn't I like to have one of those for supper? So I got off my bike and went down, and I finally got a trout and pushed it down into the stream in the shallows, and I got it. And it was a nice fish. And I didn't have any place to put it, so I put it in the paper bag along with the papers. And I had a lot of complaints about that. I don't want any more papers with fishy smells to them, Ernie.
That's innovative carrying.
And I did eat that fish.
Nice.
It wasn't as big as I thought it was, but my dad prepared it for me. He said, Mother said she didn't want to have any part of it. But Dad said, I'll take care of that. So he made up the fish and fried it up for me.
That's so great.
Oh, dear.
So it was a really rich and experience of growing up, both within sort of like this devastation, but also all of these relationships that are really even strong to this day of people you are still familiar with and connected to. There, you built this beautiful bond with people through growing up there. And am I right about that?
You are right. People.
It just seems to me that
cared about me.
And you cared about them.
And I cared about them. Every one of them.
Yeah.
I remember one of the older boys who went into service, and his mother had died, and he was left. His father was the school janitor. He was not a pleasant man. His last name was Builder, Mr. Builder. And he was very surly. But one day, as I was driving my bike by his house delivering papers, I saw that instead of a blue star, there was a gold star in his window, which meant that his son was killed in battle. And I just looked at that for a long time. And I decided I'd go up to the door, and I knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and he said, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Builder, I just saw the gold star, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry." And he said, "Would you like to come in for a Coke?" And I said, "Well, if it wouldn't be any trouble, I'd like a Coke." He said, "No trouble at all." And I don't know that I ever saw Mr. Builder after that. But those are some of the experiences I had as a kid. And I can remember on the route too, just in contrast, I drove up to this house, and she insisted that I'd deliver the paper to the door. And so I had to go up this rocky, unkempt driveway, and I finally got up there, and I got to the door. All the while, I was watching a magnificent sunset. And I got to the door, and the shades were drawn over the windows. And this woman, Mrs. Nicewender was her name, she opened the door, and she said, "Oh, my, what a gorgeous sunset. Of course, you kids never think about anything like that," and closed the door. And I thought, "You old bat, I've been looking at this for the last half hour. You sitting in there with your shades drawn?
Right.
Doggone it. Next time I'll just make sure that she has to walk down and get her paper."
Right.
I never did that.
No.
But
Yeah.
it was. But I do remember saying, "The old bat."
Gee.
It made me feel better.
Yeah. Welcome back to In the Act. I'm Erica Huntzinger. We're here with Ernie Huntzinger. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight, Erica Jane.
So we really got in some in-depth talking about your early childhood experiences, and I love the paper route stories. So great. And on the route talking, a lot of I think what we try and do on this program is to showcase that life is not linear and that we make all these guiding decisions. And how did you come from a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania to, basically we're in Sheboygan, Wisconsin now. So what happened to create a space in your head to move or change or to grow in a different direction than the coal mining area that you were in? What was that like? What happened?
Well, I think singing was a big part of it, to break out of the traditions. I had a lovely time singing in the choir with my dad and my mother and with one of my sisters. So I learned songs, and while they were religious songs, they would spin me off into different kind of worlds.
Yeah.
And then I decided that I would like to be part of shows, operettas in high school, and had a delightful time doing that. One of the songs I sang was, "Mistakes are apt to happen every day." It's funny, but it seems to be that way. The other day I took a stroll upon the avenue. I thought perhaps there'd be some lovely girlies I could view, when suddenly there appeared in front of me the neatest, trimmest figure you'd want to see. The rear view of the lady surely was a thing divine. Her hair was blonde, her step was light, her clothes were chic and fine. But when she turned around, her age was clearly 69. Mistakes are apt to happen every day. And I think, I am now way past 69, and I think, what a terrible song to listen for people who are 69 years old,
Women in general, yeah.
Women in general. And they've been the brunt of many things that I have since learned to make sure that I have been very aware of the limitations. Because in every situation, if there is a minority group, the one that experiences the most of that is the female on the end of that group. And when I hear people refer to women in a derogatory manner, I hold up my hand and say, I do not feel that way, and I resent the fact that I hear you saying these things.
Yeah.
And
you're a good advocate for sure.
But so one of the things that was singing. And I remember I auditioned for the Pennsylvania All-State Chorus. And so I was part of that and took an entourage around the state and ended up with a concert at the Philadelphia Music Hall. I can't think of the name of what they call it.
Wow.
I was offered a solo part, and I decided that I wasn't good enough to be able to sing the solo part. So one guy said he volunteered, and I thought, well, he doesn't sound nearly as good as I do. And I thought, well, the next time. But there's always a next time.
Yeah.
And I always felt as though we live and learn. We experiment with things, experiment with our own lives. And
Yeah.
so the opportunity came for me to go to school. And my mother and dad said, we cannot afford to send you to college, but we've given you the incentive to go. So I went to Penn State for a couple of years, and I didn't make the grade because I couldn't afford books. And I had to work for my board, and I had to work for my room. It was two of the worst years I ever spent because
Wow.
I was trying to make do when nothing seemed to be able to be done. Now, were there humorous instances? Were there reliefs during that period of time? Of course.
Sure.
Life goes on.
Right.
And it is not, as you indicated, linear. You have some knockdown, drag-out, funny things to occur.
Yeah.
And other times you're just simply feeling that you're just wallowing in place.
Yeah.
I had an experience at Penn State that was really devastating to me. I had listened to the abhorrent aspect of going after communists at the time by Joseph McCarthy, one of the senators of this great state of Wisconsin. He was not a pleasant man, and he uncovered things and then he manufactured things, not unlike things that are occurring today. There are things of those things that occur. And I got in late for an assignment at the class that I was in government. And I was assigned the last item to write an essay on. And the item that was to my direction was, why cannot a person become president of the United States? And all through my school history, I was told anybody can be president of the United States. And so I took this very seriously. And I wrote this essay indicating not everyone can become president of the United States. For instance, statistically, it's not possible. Then I said, and then, of course, there are things that occur. A black man would never be able to be president of the United States. This was when I was in 1952. Mm-hmm. I indicated that a Catholic could not be president. Mm-hmm. That was before John F. Kennedy. I figured that a person foreign-born couldn't become president of the United States, even though he's been in this country for any number of years. And so I submitted my paper thinking that I had done a pretty good job. I was called into the office of Dr. Brewster, who taught the course, and there were sectional leaders, and my sectional leader was there, and all sectional leaders were there. And I came into the room not knowing what was going on, and Dr. Brewster was seated behind his desk, and he threw my paper at me and said, "What is this nonsense?" And I didn't know what to say. And his next words were, "Are you a commie?" And I said, "No, I'm not a commie." He said, "How do you account for the fact that you're saying these people cannot become president of the United States? Everyone has the opportunity to become the president of the..." And I said, "Well, sir, I don't see it that way." He said, "Well, you're not going to pass this course, you know that." So I was dismissed, got an F for the course. And then my advisor said, "You'd better take that again. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to have this course." I took it again and got a D.
Wow.
And I thought, at some point or other, Ernie, you're going to have to decide for yourself what is good for you.
Right.
This is not good for you. Well, about that time, we had a new minister come into town, and he said, "Ernie, what about going to seminary? Because I think that you'd be able to find your way there." And he said, "You don't need to commit yourself. Just go and get some more schooling." Well, Mother and Dad did not want me to go into the service. My father lost a brother in World War I, and he absolutely did not want that to be part of my experience, to die young, he said. At any rate, I went to Bangor Seminary in Bangor, Maine. And was I committed to that as a ministry? No, I wasn't. But it was a fortunate turn of events because I participated fully in that program and served small churches as a student. God bless them because they put up with a lot with me. At any rate, I made my way, and I learned to really enjoy looking up things and trying to determine what is here. And the creative fluids that then start to be generated with something like that when you're starting to question, what is it here that can be profitable? I remember it was years later that in the context of that, I was thinking about the 23rd Psalm, and I thought, and this is the Lord placing a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I think how devastating that would be to be an honored guest among people who really are out to do you harm. And then, instead of my cup runneth over, what happens if I knock it over? My cup runs over. I knocked over my glass. And I thought, how devastating that would be, because now the ridicule is piled on. You see, he can't even hold the glass and keep the glass steadfast before him. What a fool he is. All the enemies coming against you. And then the statement is, nevertheless, he anointed my head with oil. After all of this, he anoints my head with oil. So that there are ways back. There are ways in which you can gain favor again. And these ways are multiple in experiences. And so I just took hold of that. And so that led me to write my sermons. I wrote sermons, I tell you, one after another. And I can remember my dear wife, at one point, I would read the sermon to her, and she'd say, well, Ernie, that's a good read, but nobody will listen to it. I think, I've spent hours on this thing. She said, I don't care how much time you spend on it. And finally she said, look, I can no longer listen to this because after she would criticize, I'd try to make it right. So I'd be up until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get this thing so that people would listen to the sermons. And that was a marvelous instrument in terms of creatively exploring various aspects, because I didn't want to just simply repeat, like so many of my colleagues do, one cliche after another. And I thought, no, I have to have some substance here. There has to be some message.
Yeah.
So I would change the words to a song in order to make the song applicable to something here and now. And and I designed a sermon in song. As a matter of fact, you narrated a sermon in song with me.
Right.
And I cherish that.
Yeah.
And creative stuff like that. Then I sang around the country as a professional singer, and you were in one of those experiences. I took you with me.
That's right.
And that was a fun experience for me.
I remember that vaguely. Well, and I think you were Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music,
yes,
in a professional musical on the East Coast.
In Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. And I auditioned for a part to go on tour with Oliver. And I was to be I can't remember what part it was. It was a very major part. So I went to the Schubert Theater in Philadelphia to audition for that part. And the director jumped up onto the stage and he said, "You're hired." And so he went to the phone and then came back and he said, "I'm sorry, the producer just tapped a fellow in New York." So that yin and yang. So here is, the opportunity, and then it's taken away. Well, I wasn't that committed because I thought, my gosh, what happens if I go on tour to my family?
Yeah.
What happens to, we had a son at the time, your brother Aaron, and my wife Nancy. So it was also a relief that I didn't get the part.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what would have turned out. And then I decided that since I had some extra time and stuff, I thought, I could write a book. So I wrote the book, The Patch. And while it hasn't been published, the fact of the matter is I started with some words on one page, and I ended up 390 pages later with the end of the book.
Right.
That was an achievement in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I've written some poetry, and some of which I think was quite good. And then some doggerel things. I have one that just comes to the top of my head here, and that happens to be a
Sure.
4th of July breakfast, it's called. General Arnold, along with some English muffins, saw his way to glory slip. 'Twas a traitorous way to use American eggs, Benedict.
That's funny.
Oh, dear.
Welcome back. We're here with Ernie Huntzinger on In the Act. I'm Erica Huntzinger. And are you about to read your poem?
There's one that I wrote. There's a rift in the sky, a tear in the clouds, where an angry light shines through. There's not a sign of blue in the half and half, when half's one side and half the other. It's hard to see the whole. And why bother? The sky is broken. What more can be said? Half a living whole is dead. And that was something that I used when 9/11 came to be.
Wow. Have you always written poetry as well?
Yeah.
So while you're in school, like early on, and then during like your ministry, when you're writing every week, like hours and hours,
Yes.
doing research, and you spent a lot of time writing and researching for your sermons. You worked 7 days a week for years and years, but you always had poetry and song. So writing and singing were always a part of that fluid process that you wove into your profession as well, or that your profession wove into your writing and singing.
Yes, it
Yeah.
did. I could never be just a minister.
Yeah.
It was very, very draining. But to use creative motifs in other ways, in singing and writing, and in counseling, never to assume too much.
Yeah.
You never take on what you know you're incapable of resolving. I always referred. So I just wanted to, I have a poem here in the end of this, is this, a child is born, a girl, a boy. What a difference a child makes. The whole world becomes a richer place. things take on new meanings. Life becomes more precious. And joy is a shining face, too young to really know, too full to ever forget. The birth of a child.
That's beautiful.
And then this was inspired by my dear daughter, Erica Jane. You.
Okay.
I have a cat whose name is Mitt. I've called her that since she was a kit. I like the way she takes to play. I like to watch her run my way. I like to pet her smooth silk hair. I love to hold her in my chair. I like the way she stretches out. I like the way she darts about. I like my Mitt, I really do. I like the way she likes me too. I'll always like my little Mitt. I've loved her since she was a kit.
I don't think I ever heard that before. That's adorable.
I like that little.
Oh my
ditty.
gosh, that's so cute.
But those are just some poems that I've written serious poems and I've written humorous poems
And you read poetry and you are an avid reader. That is, I mean, you read what, like 2 books a week probably?
Probably.
And you study and read poetry. And you can recite tons of poetry as well, which is fantastic and amazing. And you've trained your brain to retain those things in ways that then you can recall and share. It's really quite beautiful.
Well, one of the things that just comes to mind is, many times we avoid certain things and say, well, biblically, I don't want to quote biblical literature, but there are things worth quoting. And one of those is from Isaiah. And I love this statement of his, to an oppressed people, for you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills before you will break into singing, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Arise, shine, for your light has come. I've called you by name, and you are mine. I think that's a magnificent statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just magnificent.
Yeah.
And so people who shy away from, I never read the Bible. No, there's some rich treasures there and ways in which we can relate to one another in very positive ways.
Right.
And one of the things I experienced, one time I was shaving and I was going to be preaching on the subject of love. And I thought, I've said everything that I can say on the subject of love in terms of God's love for us, our love for one another, and so forth. And it came to me that a woman had just scolded me for saying, Ernie, if you don't like a person, you'll love him. And I responded to her, usually if I don't like a person, I don't love him either.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, you have to. And I was shaving. I was thinking about that conversation. And I was thinking, what did the Lord say about this? What did Jesus say about this? He said, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that became the key. I don't always love myself. I don't love myself when I speak derogatorily about another human being. I don't love myself when I try and cut corners. I don't love myself when I have been abrasive to another human being. I don't love myself when I am whatever. And I love my neighbor, or I do not love him in like fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So when you love your neighbor as yourself, you have the opportunity to be able to say, I live my life not in the parameters of what someone else establishes for me, but how it is that I live my life and how it is I derive strength from that.
Right.
And that has become the course of my my ministry, and my life in relationship to my friends, to my family, that I cherish. I cherish you, Erica Jane.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And I think it's such an interesting point to share that your experience of these difficult relational experiences with the haves and the have-nots, or the people in power and the people without power. That seems to be a theme with the talk this morning, and that to try and bridge those relationships in a way that finds the humanity within each other has been one of the guiding forces for your life, would you say?
I would say. I've been tried to be cowed by people who have a great deal more assets than I do by way of money and influence and prestige, but I've not been intimidated by them. If that person orders me to do something, I indicate, as I did to one man, I don't treat you that way, and I will not be treated that way.
Yeah. And that's part of your stand for other people, though, too. I think you stick up for people. So, getting back into the creative self within that, there's a strength within that I'm finding through talking with people about talking about creativity. There seems to be this driving force of self that doesn't want to be boxed in or held down or be told what to do or have rules that they have to abide by that are governed by something that seems unfair or not of them, and that you have to find your own way. And that seems to be sort of this emerging thought for me about the creative drive, and that it will find a way, that the will, that the person, the self finds a way to create, and that whatever that manifestation is. And for you, it's relationships and pointing out and discovery of the beautiful, not only in nature and the earth, but within each other, and the possibilities of discovery for those people as well.
I think that sums up beautifully what it is that I experience and what it is that I feel. And I'm glad that you're able to see that. Can I tell you a story that this happened to me?
Okay.
I came upon on my bicycle route when I was delivering papers years and years ago, a beautiful oxheart cherry tree on our neighbor's property. Now, he lived probably 200 yards away from my house of my parents. And I saw that cherry tree and I thought, I would love to have some of those cherries. So I decided that, the cherries weren't mine, and Mr. Yagelinski, who owned the cherry tree, was not very favorably disposed on being generous. And I knew that. So I decided I'd get some of those cherries, even though they weren't mine. And so I came back and I climbed up that cherry tree and I was eating cherries. And Mr. Yagelinski came over from his house, and he was about, probably 25 yards away, his house was. And he looked up at me at in the cherry tree and he said, Ernie, I don't want you to eat any more of those cherries. Them's my cherries. So you get down, and if I catch up in that tree again, I'm going to tan your hide. I said, okay. So I got down, I scuffed around and walked through the field, and then to get some woods, and then out of the woods, and then to go to my home. So as I'm walking over and just about to enter the woods, I saw that he had gotten into his car and drove out of his dooryard onto the road and off toward another community. So I thought, he's not going to eat all those cherries. So I made my way back and I climbed up into that cherry tree. Actually, it was his wife who had gotten into the car and drove it away. I didn't even know she could drive. And he came across the road, and now he has steam coming out of his nostrils. Not literally, of course. But at any rate, I'm up in the cherry tree. And he says, okay, I told you, you little bugger, and you get down here. And I said, no, I'm not coming down. And he said, if I have to come up after you, it's going to be that much harder. And I said, well, I'm not coming down. So he started climbing up. Well, I realized that he was afraid of heights because he'd reach out tentatively to a branch and he'd hang on to it, and then he'd reach out to another and so forth. Well, I kept going up. Well, finally, there was no more going up. I had to go out on a limb. And I went out on this limb, and so help me, Erica, to this day, I went out on that limb and I thought that that limb would break. It did not break. It was like an elevator. It let me down beautifully. And I saw him rise above me as I'm going down. And before my feet hit the ground, I let go of that limb and I took off for those woods across the field. He scampered down that tree and came running after me. And I flopped down behind one of the big logs that were in the forest, and he came thrashing through there looking for me for about, I guess it was 10 minutes or so. It wasn't probably that long, but at any rate, I hung on right there. Finally, I lifted my head, and he was going back to his house. Now, what is the creative process of that? The thing that has happened for that is, remember, there are people who own things that you cannot intrude upon.
Yeah.
That's them. Them cherries are mine.
Yeah.
Them cherries are his. You know?
Yeah.
And I learned from those experiences. I thought, holy smoke, I got away from that from the skin of my teeth.
Yeah.
And but it's an exhilaration of life because part of life is intensity. Yeah. And if you don't have intensity by way of life, and let me tell you, when you're trying to get scaring down from a tree where the guy is out to get you, that's intensity.
Yeah.
You really feel yourself alive. Well, I like to feel myself alive. And that comes by way of writing. That comes by way of singing. That comes by way of preaching. It comes by way of being a friend. It comes by way of just living. And we have to have that intensity in order to have that creative force that really drives us all in a very beautiful and magnificent way.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Well, the way life goes, I think it's very important for people to know that in all things, there's no one of us who's perfect. And so in my relationship with others, I want them to know that I also have clay feet from time to time, that I make mistakes. The illustration of the act of stealing cherries, that was an act that I knew was wrong, but I decided that I would do it anyway. That's part of life in itself. You know, and I hear people say from time to time, the very thing that I thought I'd abhor, I find myself doing.
Yeah.
You know, well, there are ways back, you know. You don't need to follow that blight on your life forever. You move on.
And how you do it and what choices you make are important.
And how you do it and the choices you make are important. I agree, Erica Jane. And you've helped me with that. I mean, heaven knows that in the course of my life, I experienced things from you where you brought me back into reality with what is your relationship to people, Dad? And how does this work for you? Because there are things that you introduced in my life that were fantastic. The way we treat other people, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
You know, sexual orientations, whether or not you're a gay or lesbian or what. We are a diverse people. We are many, many things. And when I was committing myself to ministry, I had to come to terms with the fact that my ordination is not just simply to serve one people. It's a matter of serving all God's people. And so, no matter who they are, big, small, whether they're black, white, whether they're Indian or Native Americans or, we are one people. We are one people. We like to sometimes feel as though, well, our processes make me a little bit better than everybody else. No. They all have creative moods and creative energies. And whether or not we have the opportunity to develop those sometimes is a matter of sheer money. And, people have helped me along the way, and I've helped people along the way. And we all have gifts, and those gifts are entrusted to us to be able to be used in a very special way. And not to make an impression, to be a part of life, to be a part of the ongoing aspect of life.
Right.
It's very important to me. When I see people putting blocks in the way of that for other people, then I take issue with it. And there's not always two sides to a question. If you're speaking a half-truth to something, or if you're telling a lie, don't tell me that that is a distorted fact. It is not a fact. We get mixed up at times. And there needs to be someone to be able to stand up from time to time and say, Ernie, them's my cherries. And I want to honor that.
Yeah. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but would you be willing to sing a very short song?
Well, is there a song you'd like to hear?
How about Edelweiss?
Edelweiss, Edelweiss, every morning you greet me, small and white, big and bright. You look happy to meet me. Blossom of snow, may you bloom and grow forever. Edelweiss, Edelweiss, bless my homeland forever.
That's beautiful.
I don't know whether I got all the words right, but
it was perfect.
That's a part of it.
Thank you so, so much for being on.
Erica Jane, it's always a pleasure to be in relationship with you. Truly, it is. Thank you for having me.
In the Act is produced in the studios at Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. More information on the web at meadpl.org.